Welcome back to the second video in our word problem series. In this video, we work through an example of a word problem that may be similar to something you will see in your Intro to Epi course. Now at first, this word problem looks really intimidating, but let's work through it with the steps we've learned. Step 1 says we should read the problem carefully before doing anything else. Now I'll read it together with you. As an epidemiologist for the Centers for Disease Control, you notice there is a rise in the number of cases of Lyme disease in the western United States. Since humans get Lyme disease from tick bites, you decide to focus on areas in which ticks are often found, namely large outdoor spaces. After a preliminary investigation, you discover there has been a recent increase in the number of people using national parks in the western U.S. You begin to wonder whether visiting a national park is associated with the risk of getting Lyme disease. Accordingly, you plan to conduct a month-long investigation into the usage of national parks in this part of the country and track cases of the disease. Now, right away we can see that this first paragraph is mostly background info. It may help identify the exposure and outcome and kind of goes through the step-by-step process of the scientific method, but it doesn't give me any of the numbers I'm going to need for my calculations. So let's continue reading. In the past month, there were 200,000 visitors to national parks nationwide, and 100,000 of those visitors were at national parks in the West. For your investigation, you use a representative sample of 200 individuals. 120 of these people visited a national park in the last month. The results of your investigation found that out of the 70 individuals who contracted Lyme disease, 41 of them had gone to a national park in the last month, and 29 of them did not. 51 people did not visit a national park and did not have Lyme disease. Did visiting a national park increase the risk of contracting Lyme disease in this group? So now step 2 says that we need to identify what the problem is asking for. And by the question posed at the end, I can tell that we're going to need a risk ratio since we're looking for increased risk. Now for step 3, we identify the exposure and the outcome. In this case, the exposure is visiting a national park in the West, while the outcome is going to be Lyme disease. Now take a moment to pause the video and see if you can begin filling out a 2x2 table with the info given. To give you a hint, it looks like this first sentence here is just filler info, and we're using a sample population where the info is given here. So take a moment and see if you can do that 2x2 table. Now for step 4, we begin filling out our 2x2 table with any info given. Remember, our exposure is going to be over here, and our outcome is going to be on the top. If you'll remember, our exposure of interest was visiting a national park in the West. So I'll just shorten that to visited NP, did not visit NP. And our outcome is Lyme disease. So we'll say Lyme disease, no Lyme disease. Now for the numbers, we focus on the sample population of 200 that's being used for the study, so that's going to be our total over here. And we were also told that 100 people visited a national park, so that's going to be our total over here. And then we were told that 70 people had Lyme disease. And out of those 70, 41 went to a national park, 29 did not. We were also told that 51 people did not visit a national park and did not have Lyme disease. So that would go here in cell D. Now, then we have to find the missing values, doing addition and subtraction. And if you did all that, you should end up with 79 here, 130 here, and it looks like 80 over here. Now we have our full table. We'll move on to step 5. We perform any necessary calculations. We know that our problem here is asking for a risk ratio. Take a moment to pause the video using your 2x2 table, see if you can calculate that risk ratio on your own. Now we look in the cells that we made on our 2x2 table, and it looks like we end up with 41 over 120 all over 29 over 80 for our math for these cells here and our total cells here. And then when we plug that into a calculator, we end up with 0.94. Now I usually default to 2 decimal places if the question doesn't specify. Most likely the question you're dealing with will specify. Now for step 6, we interpret our results. Take a moment to pause the video again, see if you can write an interpretation of our risk ratio, which was 0.94. Remember what we've learned about wording. So in this case, I would say, those who visited a national park in the West had 0.94 times the risk of contracting Lyme disease than those who did not visit the national park. Now, if the problem were to further ask if this is significant, remember that values very close to 1 often do not have much significance. I would say that this study did not establish a strong relationship between visiting a national park in the West and contracting Lyme disease. Now, step 7 suggests that we double check everything related to our word problem before we settle on our answers. Here's a checklist that can help. The first 2 steps to do with double checking everything in our 2x2 table. So, are the outcomes and exposures in the right spot? Did your 2x2 table totals add up? Did you use the correct formulas? Is your answer in the right format? And does your interpretation make sense? Remember to stay calm and keep it simple. Don't let extra info get in your way. Word problems always contain more than what's needed. So don't feel like you need to use all of it, and with a clear definition of exposure and outcome, and knowing what the problem is asking for, you're already halfway done. Word problems are not meant to be overly complicated, but they are meant to test your ability to pull out relevant information and get to the answer. So to recap, this video tied together some previous concepts to work through a word problem example from start to finish using the 7 steps. We also discussed the importance of keeping things simple in the process. Please continue to video number 3 for another word problem example. Practice is really important, so you don't struggle to get started during these timed exams.